Chapter 18. The Burlean Dragon Slayers. The moment Dementia and Willowwood touched down in the land of the lonely, they rushed to Magica's side. She was only just breathing. Dementia frantically crushed a few peppermint leaves between his rubbery fingers. He delicately opened Magica's mouth and placed the crushed pieces under her tongue. As the fumes made their way down her throat, they burned away the evil spell. Magica felt relieved and she squeezed Frother and Harry's hands. "I'm going to be okay," she smiled. "The curse is no longer within." Frother and Harry's eyes flowed freely with tears of joy. How Dementia wished that he could have joined in. Tear ducts sure would have come in handy, yet again. Having regained his composure, the aging soul wizard summoned Old Faithful. "We need to get to Flush Fleas as soon as possible." He decided to leave Willowwood in the care of his companions. His gut feeling was that things were going to get very nasty from this point onwards. By the time Dementia reached Flush Fleas, a few fairies had already perished. He was deeply saddened by this news. The wizards all helped him crush peppermint leaves and make the hundreds of home visits. It took them hours to visit every single fairy home and administer the peppermint medicine. It had been an extremely tiring day, but most rewarding nevertheless. The fairies of Flush Fleas were safe once again and would recover fully over the next few days. The next morning, Dementia was visited by a very grateful Mayor Weasel. His daughter, Wandina, had been saved from the brink of death. He confessed to having compromised Flush Flea's resistance to evil forces by paying the Burlean Dragon Slayers with Flush Flea's sacred jewels. Only about half of the jewels still remained. Whilst the fairies recovered, Dementia spent hours trying to work out how to get the sacred jewels back from the Burlean Dragon Slayers and how to defeat Trezon. Returning the sacred jewels was essential. They protected Flush Fleas and gave it its energy. Trezon's magic could still hurt them while the sacred jewels were missing and the energy remained low. The Burlean Dragon Slayers were both a powerful and intelligent race. They had to be, in order to defeat the strong and cunning Doolan dragons. Dementia was not going to be able to outmuscle or outsmart them in order to regain the sacred jewels. Rather, he needed to present them with something that they would view as being of equal or greater value than the sacred jewels. Then he could do a fair trade. Suddenly, out of the blue, it came to him. "Hurry!" he shouted at Old Faithful. "We need to get to Angry Mountain pronto! Oh, hi, Skellum."
"Drat!"
thought Skellum.
"How did he spot me?"
The Carbonara was both surprised and disappointed. After all, she'd painted herself from head to toe in the exact same colour purple as the 30-centimetre high Flush Flea's wild grass in which she was crouching. Unfortunately, Skellum was totally colourblind. She had in fact painted herself luminous orange. Apart from this blatant giveaway, her leopard crawling had flattened the grass completely, creating an obvious path. She may as well have been dragging a lawnmower behind her. Angry Mountain was angry by name and angry by nature. The rumbling and grumbling became louder and louder with every step forward that Dementia took. Boiling lava bubbled on the surface, occasionally spurting upwards. By the time he reached the loose pieces of volcanic rock, the heat of the surrounding air was extremely intense. He bent down and started to load piece after piece of this impressive rock into large fire-resistant bags. By the time he had filled all the bags, his hands, feet, body and face had been melted away quite severely. The disfigurement was totally grotesque and not a pleasant sight for the squeamish. His altered physical appearance did not bother him in the slightest. After all, he was not a fashion model. It did impact on his eyesight though, because his molten upper eyelids had slumped downwards quite considerably and were now partially obscuring his view. He valiantly tried to rip both of these drooping upper eyelids off. He stretched both forward more than 30 centimetres before arm fatigue set in, and both eyelids went slamming back towards his eye sockets with enormous force. This ocular trauma caused his eyesight to become even more blurry and distorted. Half-blind and cooked medium rare, he arrived with Old Faithful and several heavy bags of volcanic rock at the picturesque Burlier Valley, which lies perfectly nestled between the two peaks of Mount Polaris. This exquisite valley is teeming with vegetation and wildlife, and is home to the Burlian dragon slayers. Most of the vegetation is poisonous though, as is the wildlife that has adapted to live on it. Consequently, over the years, the Burlian dragon slayers have become experts in poison extraction techniques. The two peaks of Mount Polaris are both composed almost completely of a strongly magnetized iron ore called magneto. One peak contains positively polarized magneto, and the other peak contains negatively polarized magneto. The two peaks are therefore strongly attracted to one another and fill the air between them with a powerful magnetic energy. Many believe that the Burlian dragon slayers are such healthy and robust creatures because the magnetic energy in the air causes their blood to circulate incredibly well, promoting excellent tissue growth and regeneration. You do have to be vigilant whilst visiting Burlier though, because enormous loose boulders from each of the peaks occasionally succumb to the pull from the opposing peak and go flying through the air from one main peak to the other. Dementia was greeted by the leader of the Burlian dragon slayers, King Malemas. This charismatic ruler looks the epitome of a perfectly constructed human male, save for his dagger-sharp fingertips. He has the body of a Greek Adonis, a face similar to that of the famous romance novel cover boy Fabio, and the presence and confidence of a Hollywood film star. His dark brown eyes and thin masculine lips give nothing away. His hair is salt and pepper coloured, more salt than pepper, and his skin is tough, dry and weather-beaten. This all adds to his rugged masculine appeal. His exposed arms are rippled with muscles, the result of many years of pulling back hard on taut arrow strings and pounding thick Halidian metal bars into thin sheet metal. Despite the Burlian dragon slayer males all looking like America's next supermodel, he was definitely the pick of the crop. Nobody dared to challenge his strength or authority. He was ferocious in hand-to-hand combat, and was the only known of his kind to have ever defeated a Dulan dragon with his bare hands. About 5 years ago, whilst hunting a particularly large Dulan dragon, the white female Modestar unicorn upon which he was flying came too close to the Dulan dragon's left flank, and its enormous left wing sent them both hurtling towards the ground. The poor unicorn hit the ground with enormous velocity and died upon impact. But Malemas, a little bit disorientated, landed on top of her flattened carcass and somehow managed to survive. This made him easy pickings for the Dulan dragon. It swooped down and grabbed him in one fluent motion. It then lifted him up towards its open mouth to consume like a peanut. Just in the nick of time, Malemas managed to summon the strength required to squirm himself free of its vice-like grip. He then slid down the front of its fiberglass neck and into one of the delicate folds in its soft belly. With his dagger-sharp nails, he then pierced through its soft tummy and drove his entire arm all the way upwards towards this beast's thumping heart. He grabbed the heart and ripped it out. The other Burlian dragon slayers, who were watching from above on their unicorns, were stunned by what they had just witnessed. It was the stuff that legends are made of. As a reward for his gallant effort, he was presented with the most obese of the eligible young brides. Yes, obesity is seen as a great sign of beauty by Burlian dragon slayer males. The bigger their wives, the better. A perfect dragon slayer female has enormous cellulite-covered buttocks, hips and thighs, a wine barrel-shaped tummy that shakes like jelly, and a swollen face with at least 3 chins. The females, therefore, gorge themselves from morning till dusk on a high-fat, high-calorie diet. They look at their full-length mirrors every morning, hoping to discover new folds of fat and additional cellulite indentations. Although King Malemas was taken aback by Dementia's horrendous disfigurement, he was even more stunned by the Soul Wizard's ridiculous proposal. "Why would we even consider trading our magnificent and valuable Flush Flea's jewels, which we've worked so hard to attain, for a bag of ugly rocks?" shouted King Malemas. His voice was deep and commanding. He was wearing a solid gold chest plate that was encrusted with jewels, including a few of the Flush Flea's sacred jewels. Dementia knew that Burlian dragon slayers always tried to preheat their arrows to as high a temperature as possible, so that their arrows can melt their way through the thick, fiberglass-like skin of Doolan dragons. Cold arrows would just bounce off them unless you were able to strike their soft underbellies, but it was almost impossible to get to their underbellies and was simply too risky. Malemas's experience was a perfect example of just how risky this could be. If its enormous wings didn't get you, its even longer and more powerful tail would. Trouble also occurred when the preheated arrows cooled down and the pursuer suddenly became the pursued. The volcanic rocks from Angry Mountain would heat the arrows to such an extreme temperature that the arrowheads would remain boiling hot for considerably longer and would slice through the Doolan dragon's body armor like a hot knife through butter. Dementia also knew that these superheated rocks would greatly assist the Burlian dragon slayers with their ironworks. Their metal craftsmanship was highly sought after. However, it took so much time and effort to create sufficient heat to melt the Hylidian metal bars that it often did not pay them to accept some of the smaller projects that were offered to them. King Malemas was clearly intrigued and requested a demonstration of the rock's superheating powers. Dementia threw a few into an open fire. Within moments, the heat of the fire had intensified threefold. A few moments later, and the heat was so intense that they all had to step back 5 meters. "You have a deal," smiled King Malemas. He grabbed the bags of volcanic rock and handed over the bag of sacred jewels. Dementia coughed sheepishly as he stared at the king's chest plate. "Oh yes," said King Malemas, and used a sharp arrowhead to lever out the remaining sacred Flush Flean jewels from his chest plate. "If you can keep supplying us with these magic rocks," continued King Malemas, "we will keep your sugar fairies safe, free of charge." "You have a deal," smiled Dementia. Dementia asked one further favour. He asked if they would be prepared to temporarily set aside their differences with the Doolan dragons and use their combined strength to assist in destroying Trezon. Malemas and the other Burlian dragon slayers let out an enormous gasp and stepped backwards at the mere mention of Trezon's name. It was a clear indication of just how fearful they were of this evil megalomaniac. He had caused them a great deal of grief and hardship in the past, and they would have done anything to see the back of him, even if it meant forming a temporary alliance with the Doolan dragons. One of Trezon's nastier spells was the dagger spell that caused all the tips of the Burlian dragon slayer's fingers to become as sharp as daggers, in an Edward Scissorhandish sort of way. This had made embracing their spouses really difficult, which is exceedingly upsetting to them because they're a very affectionate, touchy-feely race. Trezon did this to punish them for refusing to add sugar fairy slaying to their resumes. Dementia assured King Malemas that this spell would be broken the moment Trezon was destroyed. Malemas and his brigade listened carefully as Dementia explained the plan.